also being touted as something incredibly healthful. So it was being put in beverages and sold to the elite because it was so expensive, because the radium was so expensive. But then they even started coming up with gadgets and gizmos that you could strap on your body and there would be health benefits and you didn't have to take it orally. It was touted as a wonder element. Now I want you to pay attention to the dates here. 1914, specialists knew that radium could deposit in the bone, and they also noted ingestion would increase red blood cells. And that was why they started saying it's a health tonic. But due to the stimulation of the bone marrow, overstimulation occurred and it resulted in destruction of the red blood cells, which actually ended up causing anemia and clots in the marrow, resulting in necrosis and tissue death, thus the injury that you saw to the jaw in the beginning. 3 years later, we are now having women in factories paint dials on watches, airplane equipment. They were using it as the beverages, and the technique was known as a lip dip paint. So what they would do is put the paintbrush in water. Because it was camel hair and it was very expensive paint, they wanted to put it in their mouth and twist it to a point so that they could then dip it in the paint and use less paint and paint the little numbers on the dials. So this is a picture of what it looked like. This stuff was so expensive that the girls were pegged if they overused it. So they wanted to make sure that they had the finest point on those paintbrushes. Those girls went home and they jokingly would turn off the lights and smile at each other because their teeth started glowing. They didn't know why. They did know that they were putting the paint in their mouth. But soon their teeth began to loosen. Their hair and their clothes would glow because they were only allowed to take home their smocks and wash them at home once a week. It got on their skin. So as these girls started going to dentists, they started seeing problems. You realize that the radium itself emits an alpha wave, which could be stopped by just simply using paper, the beta, which could be stopped by a sheet of lead, and the gamma, which required a thicker sheet of lead. So exposure to the paint and the dial workers did find its way to the bones. It was interesting because they even documented that their femurs were so full of the radium that they could put their leg on an x-ray and it would image on the film. The half-life of radium is 1,600 years. So now we're at 1921, and we've got a dentist, Dr. Joseph Neff, who saw his very first case of what mimicked phossy jaw, which was when people were making matchsticks and they were having problems and the phosphorus would go to the jaw. The extraction sites in these individuals where they had loose teeth and they were taking them out never would heal. They would continue to bleed. And so the jaw itself looked like it was moth-eaten, and oftentimes when they would take out a tooth, part of the jaw would come out with it, or with the force of them trying to take out a mandibular tooth, the entire mandible would break off and come out. So there's these horrible photographs of individuals with absolutely no jaw, and their skin is just hanging. The radium would eat through a jugular vein, and oftentimes these people would simply die from drowning in their own blood. There was a dentist that took the jaw that broke off on one of these girls and he threw it in the drawer of his desk, and it just so happened there were other x-rays in there. And we went back to look at the other x-rays. They had been exposed, and all the x-rays in that drawer were all fogged up just simply because of the radiation off of that jaw. So now we're at 1923, and the dentists are starting to see more Vincent's angina, which the word angina is to choke. It took the life of a woman that worked in that very same dial painting factory. It's a bacterial disease that begins in the gums and involves the throat and all these ulcers they were seeing in the mouth, and swollen dead tissue just simply sloughs off. So then we started seeing other cases that popped up. Now here's the issue. The doctors were not sharing the cases with each other, and that is my reason for standing up here. Dr. Theodore Bloom, who was an oral surgeon in New York, noticed a woman with a moth-eaten jaw. Her face was swollen with pus bags, and he was the first to diagnose that she was actually suffering from a poisoning of a radioactive substance. 1924 is where we are now, and there are two dentists, Dr. Walter Berry and James Davison, who actually talked to each other and suggested that the plant using the radium to paint the dials be closed because of what they were seeing in their dental practices. They also filed a complaint with the Department of Labor and the Public Health Service. In 1924, Dr. Bloom lectured on jaw necrosis to the ADA and came up with the new term radium jaw because radium is a bone seeker. The men that were working with radium were required to wear heavy lead aprons and tongs to hold the glass vials that held the radium, but not the women that were doing the painting. So the final victory came in 1939, where they actually, closed the plant and said, okay, the radium is a problem and you can't take it orally, and we're going to stop making beverages and everything else because now the elite were dying off. We didn't care about the poor people that were painting the dials, but by the time we got to people with money, now it becomes an issue. In 1979, the EPA ordered a cleanup of 750 homes that were near that dial plating plant. And what they did was they tore everything down and ground it up into sand and took it to the school playground. This increased the cancer rate of the children at the school. So the completion of the entire cleanup ended in 2015. The takeaway from this is we need to share cases. Like Blanche said, we hear something that is cool and new and everybody jumps on it, but what do we really know about it? So I'm encouraging you. Felix Leao has been very good about trying to get us. We have a journal in the organization. Get with Felix if you don't know how to write a paper, put it out there. Please, you guys, take the time to share your unusual cases with each other, because I remember when 24 years ago, I saw my first case of Borrelia come up on EAV. I knew what Lyme was, and please, I want to take the opportunity to educate you. It's not Lyme's disease, it's Lyme disease. And so we want to look educated to our peers. We want to make sure and use the correct terminology. But how many cases of Lyme do we see now? A lot. So it takes us networking with each other, and I want to encourage you to do that. If we had not heard from Weston Price or George Meinig or Hal Huggins or Blanche Gruby or anybody else who's going to be lecturing this weekend, we wouldn't have that information to change our practice now. So simply one practice can make a difference. Obviously, you can see what two dentists band together and did.